Imagine running through a muddy field, carrying a heavy bucket of water, while your own body fights against you. Every step is a jolt of pain. Every movement is a struggle against gravity. This was the daily reality for millions of medieval women. We tend to think of the past as a time of loose robes and freedom, but for a woman, the lack of a bra wasn't liberation, it was a physical sentence. History books written by men ignored it. Paintings by monks sanitized it. But the biological reality remained. Breasts are heavy, they move, and without support, they hurt. For centuries, historians assumed that medieval women simply let gravity take its course. They believed that under those woolen dresses, there was nothing but a loose linen shift. But this assumption was not just wrong, it was insulting. It erased the daily ingenuity of women who had to invent engineering solutions for their own bodies using nothing but scraps of cloth and desperate knots. They didn't have elastic, they didn't have underwires. They had friction, compression, and pain. So, how did they do it? How did they stop their bodies from becoming obstacles in a life defined by hard labor? The answer lies in the shadows of history, hidden in the complaints of monks and the rot of castle floorboards. It turns out, women were not just enduring, they were binding, stitching, and constructing secret armor for their chests. The first method was brutal but effective: the bind. Long before the corset, women used strips of linen, essentially bandages, to wrap their torsos tight. This wasn't about looking good, it was about immobilization. A peasant woman harvesting wheat couldn't afford to have her chest swinging with every scythe stroke. So, she strapped herself down. Think of it like a medieval sports bra, but made of rough, non-stretch fabric that dug into the skin. We know this because of men like Gilbert of Hoyland, a 12th century monk. He wrote with a mix of fascination and disgust about women using breast bands to hide their overgrown bodies. To him, it was vanity. To the women, it was survival. But this binding came at a cost. In the heat of summer, sweat would pool under the tight linen. The rough fabric would rub against sensitive skin until it was raw and bleeding. There were no antibiotic creams for the rashes that formed in the dark. Damp folds of the bind. This was the silent agony of the working woman. She traded the pain of bouncing for the pain of chafing. But for the wealthy, support took a different, more structural turn. By the 11th century, fashion began to tighten its grip. The bliaut arrived, a gown that laced up the sides so tightly it created horizontal wrinkles across the torso. This was the ancestor of the corset. It didn't just cover the body, it squeezed it. Noble women used these gowns to hoist their anatomy upward and flatten it inward. It was support through suffocation. But here is where the story gets strange. Historians argued for decades that true cups or bras didn't exist. They said women just smashed everything flat. They were wrong. In the 14th century, a surgeon named Henri de Mondeville let slip a secret. He wrote about women who sewed bags into their chemises, literal pockets for their breasts. They would insert their chest into these bags and then bind them in place with a strap. It sounds bizarre, almost like a medical device. But it proves that women were actively engineering lift and separation 500 years before the modern bra was patented. They were hacking their own clothes to fight gravity. But the biggest shock was yet to come, buried under centuries of dirt. In the year 2008, the history of underwear was rewritten overnight. Archaeologists were renovating Langberg Castle in Austria when they found a hidden vault under the floorboards. It was filled with trash, old shoes, scraps of fabric, and dust. But among the debris, they found something that shouldn't have been there. It looked like a bikini top. They found 4 linen garments with distinct sewn cups. They had straps, they had lace fastenings. One even had decorative needlework. These weren't crude bandages, they were bras. Real, recognizable bras from the 15th century. The historical community was stunned. For years, they had told us medieval women went unsupported, yet here was physical proof that they had been sewing sophisticated lingerie in secret. This discovery changed everything. It meant that women weren't just suffering in silence, they were innovating. They were creating comfortable, supportive garments that the male chroniclers simply never saw or chose never to mention. But why hide them? Why stash them under a floorboard like contraband? The answer might lie in the shame attached to the female body. The church taught that the body was a vessel of sin. Drawing attention to the chest, even for support, could be seen as vanity or lust. Bags for the breasts were mocked in satirical poems as tools of seduction. So, women kept their inventions hidden. The Langberg bras were likely worn under layers of wool, a secret comfort known only to the wearer. But comfort was a luxury. For a nursing mother in the Middle Ages, the breast was a tool, not an ornament, and the lack of modern nursing bras turned motherhood into a logistical nightmare. Imagine wearing a dress laced up the back, with a linen shift underneath, and a hungry infant screaming. There were no clips to undo. Women had to untie, unlace, and expose themselves to the cold air, often in fields or drafty huts. The constant exposure and lack of support led to medical horrors. Mastitis, an infection of the breast tissue, was rampant and often untreated. Abscesses would form, bursting and weeping into the linen shifts. Without antibiotics, a simple blocked milk duct could turn into a fever that killed you. The breast wasn't just a body part, it was a potential death trap. As the Middle Ages waned, the support systems became even more aggressive. We moved from the bag to the board. Aristocratic fashion demanded a flat, stiff torso. Women began inserting stiffened canvas, pasteboard, glued layers of paper, or even wood into the front of their gowns. This was the birth of the busk. They were essentially wearing armor. These stiffened bodices pushed the breasts up, creating the famous heaving bosom look of the Renaissance. But they offered zero protection. In fact, they caused new injuries. The stiff edges would dig into the soft tissue of the underarm and the top of the breast. Women were bruising themselves to fit the mold. The irony is cruel. As the technology for support improved, it became less about the woman's comfort and more about the male gaze. The Langberg bra was designed for the woman. The stiffened bodice was designed for the observer. The breast had gone from a burden to be managed to a trophy to be displayed. But what about the women who couldn't afford pasteboard or tailored gowns? The peasant woman in the 16th century was still using the same old tricks: the tight belt, the crossed shawl, the strip of rag. Her struggle remained unchanged. She lived a life of friction. We have to remember the hygiene conditions. These women were wrapping their sweaty, chafed skin in linen that might not be washed for weeks. Fungal infections were a constant itching plague. The smell of stale sweat and sour milk would have been trapped under those layers, a secret shame that every woman carried. And yet, they persisted. They worked. They raised children. They built the medieval world while carrying a physical weight that history ignored. Their resilience wasn't just in their muscles, it was in their ability to endure constant, low-level discomfort every single day of their lives. The story of the medieval bra is not just about underwear. It is a story about the silence of women in history. We thought they wore nothing because men didn't write about it. We thought they were primitive because we didn't look under the floorboards. But the Langberg find proves that women have always been engineers of their own survival. They didn't wait for the 20th century to invent support. They stitched it together with needle and thread in the candlelight. They bound their pain with linen. They defied the gravity of their time. So, the next time you fasten your own support, remember the women of Langberg. Remember the secret bags and the rough bandages. They bore the weight of history, unsupported and unthanked, but never, ever defeated. Did this change how you see the past? Subscribe for more history that uncovers the hidden struggles of the forgotten.